Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, Karibu, Wamkelekile, and welcome again to everybody. My name's Andy Jones from Radio Film, and I've been the producer of this session. And before we get started and introduce your chair for the afternoon, I'd just like to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, to the wonderful people at Sheffield Doc Fest for making this all happen and encouraging this to happen, and also to our friends at the Association for Transformation in Film and Television in South Africa, a new organisation supporting emerging black filmmakers, black and coloured filmmakers in South Africa. We're delighted to have one of their delegation on the panel this morning. It's been a funny week, and I've been asked at different times this week if I'm South African or Kenyan, and reminded by the fact that just last week at an interactive exhibition, my 7-year-old daughter turned to me and said, "Dad, is it true that we're all made of stars?" I said, "Well, we were." And in that same way that we were once all African, I've replied yes when people ask me if I'm South African, and yes when people ask me if I'm Kenyan, because we all are really. So without further ado, your chair for the session, Mr. Onyekachi Wambu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for all of you. I hope you're having a really exciting festival. The festival has grown enormously since I last came a few years ago, but I'm very happy to be here for a really important session. The media and broadcasting landscape in Africa is changing. People are talking about an Africa Rising narrative. Part of that change is, that the media and landscape is just really kind of transforming itself. Earlier this year, we did a conference on that changing narrative and had some of the key players at that conference, the Chinese who were there, CCTV, and the other Chinese broadcasters who are about to invest about $2 billion into their African operations, and they're actually transmitting from Africa. And on the panel were the BBC, and the speaker from China said after nearly 50, 60 years on the continent, the BBC was still not transmitting from the continent, but we were, which was an interesting insight. And he felt that it was important for them to build the infrastructure on the continent, create jobs, and tell different kinds of stories. And what they were concerned about was actually telling positive stories, which is another interesting kind of mix to the dimension, because they felt that what the Western media were doing were telling negative stories all the time about Africa, and they wanted to correct and reset the balance. Apart from the Chinese, obviously there are lots of other players now. Al Jazeera are in there, Press TV's in. We understand the French are about to invest a lot more in their own African operations. The Americans are coming in, Bloomberg, lots of other channels are coming in. So you can see that in the same way that lots of people are coming in to invest in African resources, there's also a huge appetite for what's going to be happening in the media. So we wanted to situate the discussion today against the backdrop of that changing landscape, and to talk about the role that African filmmakers have in producing material inside of that framework. Is it getting easier? What are the challenges? And what does it mean to be talking about a specific African voice? The session is, you can't tell this story without us. What does that mean? And we want this to really be an interactive session as much as possible. So once the speakers finish their introductions and ask a few questions, we want to come to you and have a really interesting discussion, because I'm sure you all have things to contribute. I can see many people in the audience, like Soros, who distinguished filmmakers themselves, and I'm sure will have a lot of points and of interest to contribute to this discussion. The only other thing I wanted to say before we started was just to really say that Africa is a big continent. And every time I chair a session on Africa, some bright PhD student will come up afterwards and say, you can't generalize about a continent that's that big. And so I'm going to, first of all, repeat how big the continent is. You can fit China, the US, Western Europe, and probably India into the African continent. And nowhere else, I know, would we talk about somewhere as huge, as diverse in one session and make the kind of generalizations that we're going to make. But we are going to go ahead and do it. But we have to bear in mind that what we're saying obviously comes from our own perspectives, and as much as possible, Africans themselves are trying to create this Pan-African framework at the AU level. So they're embarked on a very ambitious project, and what we're going to do today is going to be equally ambitious. And there will be much generalizing, but we hope that inside the generalizing, you can take what is useful away with you. So with that major disclaimer, I'll go ahead and introduce the panel. The other key thing is please turn off your mobile phones so that we don't get interrupted as we start. I have a distinguished panel. On my right, we have Rihad Desai, who was born in South Africa. He was raised in exile in the UK, and so you'll hear the London twangs in his voice. Right. And returned home in 1990. He's renowned as a director of hard-hitting political documentaries, including his latest, Miners Shot Down, which opened the festival. And we hope to go to him first with, he's going to make a sort of 10-minute presentation, and there'll be a short trailer of his work. But before we come to Rihad, next to Rihad is Judy Kibanji, who's a Kenyan director and the driving force behind DocuBox, East Africa's first documentary film fund established in 2013 and currently supporting a slate of projects. Judy also runs production house 7, and her feature film, Something Necessary, premiered at the Toronto Film Festival in 2013. And then at the end, we have Flora Gregory. Flora is editor witness at Al Jazeera, so she's a commissioning editor. But before that, she ran Channel 4's reporter-led foreign affairs series, Unreported World, for 5 years, and then joined Al Jazeera English in 2005 to run Witness. So each of those will come at this subject. Each of them will come at this subject from very different perspectives, but I just wanted to go first to Rihad to give us his 10 minutes, and then to give us a general context. Thanks.
Yeah. Excuse my possible lack of comprehension. I was at the Dogwoof party last night. It was either that vodka or the nicotine in an electric cigarette, which was spiked, or the man-woman dancer I ended up going home with. It is a... I remember debating this issue really, very similar, Nothing About Us Without Us, a few years ago in a South African cinema, and nearly getting throttled by a group of black filmmakers afterwards and being called a coconut, because I think if you look at Spike Lee's films, the best Spike Lee films are actually not about black Americans. They're about Jewish people, Catholic people, white people actually. His insight, the attention he pays to those communities. He's carrying far less baggage when he's doing stories about other people than his own people. And I think we need to take that into account, because before I sort of frayed entered in the film industry, I was in the academy at the university and doing my master's and planning to do a PhD. And we had this wave of postmodernism which said basically, you know, you can't do films about people, you know, if you're a man, you can't do film about a woman, and if you're black, you can't do films about white, but most importantly, if you're white, you can't do films about black people. Not real films, not authentic films, you know, how dare you attempt to represent us because you're not one of us. And I think that's utter cuck, and it needs to be thrown into the dustbin of history where it belongs, because we are filmmakers, first and foremost. We are driven by things that we find compelling, that move us emotionally, and sometimes an outside gaze when it's told from the inside, can be hugely illuminating. So I don't subscribe to this, and I want to come back to a few remarks our chair spoke to, but I don't subscribe to this notion that somehow we should bar you Europeans from coming to Africa to making films about us. You're always making films about us. You're treating us like a zoo. You know, you're on a safari. You're very superficial. And there is, of course, some element of truth to it, but I want to come back to that, and I think it can be escaped if your starting place is the right starting place. Maybe we'll come back to that in debate, but I thought I'd put that out there as a provocation. The CCTV, I mean, come on. It's a propaganda outfit. Anybody with any integrity working for those people, you've got to be joking. You know, yes, there's loads of money, and you can, if you've got up and going production house, and you want to do stories, you know, from your country, you can do them, but there are very, very real limitations when you're working for the Chinese. And there's probably a couple of other channels like that, which I think as documentary filmmakers we shouldn't be touching with a barge pole. It's not to say some of my good friends and colleagues are touching them, are working with them, and working with them closely, and earning a reasonable living. Flora's here, I think, in some sense, you know, people, the purer sort of BBC types would have problems with Al Jazeera. You know, the Qatari money, the guy's a sheikh, he's got an agenda, and the agenda seems to be closing down, particularly when it comes to the Arab reportage, and the fact that the Arab Spring is on the decline, the Arab Revolution's on the decline, and he's, I'm told, been brought back into the fold, and what implications that will have for how Al Jazeera operates is yet to be seen. Maybe Flora will be able to tell us a little bit about that, but I'm sure she's compromised as she's on a public platform. I think the French have been particularly guilty of the biggest sin, and that is demanding that their program is in French. And if you don't do your films in French, we're not really interested in you, we're not going to support you, we're not going to give you public funds. That's happened to some big African fiction and documentary filmmakers. They've been guilty of not willing to build a platform and build capacity in their former colonies. History certainly will judge them, but I think they've probably been one of the biggest single donors of African film production, documentary around historically. The negative stories, I mean, really, come on. I mean, Darwin's nightmare. I mean, the debates we had in South Africa, well, this is not showing Africa in a good light. And this is done by Europeans. And who are they? I mean, what cuck is that? Sorry, it must be the drugs. I'm swearing too much. But you know, this notion of the African Renaissance, and we must portray Africa in a positive light, has nothing to do with storytelling. It simply has nothing to do with good storytelling. And you know, the truth is always in the cracks. And as documentary filmmakers, we've got to find those cracks and exploit them. And if it's deep and it's dark and it's horrible and it's despairing, actually, sometimes that's what films have to be. And I think Darwin's Nightmare was an excellent film. So yeah, let's. And there's what was the other thing? Liberia, Civil War. Jonathan Stack's film. I don't know if anybody's seen that. Again, South Africa. How can you portray Africans, you know, as cannibals? That scene where the guy is eating the heart of his victim. It's there's obviously a line there, but I don't think we've really got to escape this attempt to be politically correct and all pro-African and so on. So that's my tuppence. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Andy, do you want to show a clip from? Okay.
The life of a black person in Africa is so cheap. Asifuni gaza ezophalala, kodwa sifuna izinkinga zenu nemifuzo yenu bayitholakale comrade.
Kazi funa umqeqeshe kureko siphendula ngemali esifunayo. Kuphela. Sikwazi ukufika emsebenzini. Kodwa engekasiphendula imali esifunayo. Asizisuka apha. Singazisuswa ngabo lamaphoyisa lapha.
Why the use of police force armed to the teeth against miners who were not occupying mining property or territory, were not occupying any strategic point, were not blocking the national highway or any minor road?
I said, all this is in God's hands. I'm a mortal man. Those are my words. I'm a mortal man. I still remember vividly the face of those workers.
Let us take note of the fact that whatever happened represents the best of responsible policy.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Some interesting points that Rihad made. There's issue of the gaze, the issue of authenticity, the Chinese and what some of the other, and the French and Al Jazeera and what some of the other major funders of documentaries in Africa are making, and the issue of truth-telling. So we'll please keep those in your minds for the discussion later on. I'm sure you'd want some points you want to pick up with him. Judy, you make your presentation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Judy Kipenge, and I run an organization called DocuBox. And DocuBox is really an answer from a region. I'm from Kenya. From a region that finds it very hard to raise support to make not just documentary films, but any kind of film, you know, whether it's fictional film or factual film or creative documentary. And a couple of years ago, when, as a filmmaker, I was asked by the Ford Foundation to do a little bit of research about what was kind of stopping our market or our industry from growing and developing. The answers came back and they were so clear, and they were just a handful of them. Of course, financing, mattered a lot, but so did a sense of community amongst us as filmmakers in East Africa. So did technical training. So did a feeling of mentorship and support. And I think I always find it interesting when speaking to filmmakers from other parts of the world, be it South Africa or be it out here in the UK or in Europe, because everywhere you go, you suddenly realize, okay, it's a hustle finding money wherever you live and wherever you're from to make the projects that you want to. But I think people don't realize how much of a hustle it can be. We're in a region where our broadcasters put very minuscule amounts into any kind of creative effort or film from filmmakers. Actually, in fact, as documentary makers, you can expect to pay your broadcaster to have your film. I've recently finished a film that took me about 3 years to make, and took it round to broadcasters and was asked to sort of raise 300,000 shillings for them to do the honor of flighting it. And this is not unusual. This is normal where we come from. Again, I think a new film grant initiative has come from government, which is great and worth celebrating. But we're still sort of working to help our own governments realize that if they give you a film grant, you can't pay it back in 6 months. You're still in the cutting room. And so it can be extremely difficult to make a film in East Africa, and yet they're being made. And I think this is something that we sometimes don't stop to kind of give ourselves a bit of a clap, because somehow in between the hustle, in between taking on CCTV jobs, which we do, because somebody's got to pay the rent, right? It's either you become a hairdresser or you take on NGO and commissioned work and CCTV work because you pay the rent, and somehow in between all of that madness, you're making films. You're trying to make films. You're trying to sort of create something new. So DocuBox came out of realizing that what we really needed were, yes, financing, but it wasn't about a big, take all this money and make a film. It was about, okay, how do you tell a great story? Because if you're not seeing them, if we're not surrounded by and seeing, if we don't have our versions of Sheffield in our own spaces, then how are we even beginning to have our own conversations amongst ourselves about what we love in a film, what we hate in a film? So we needed, of course, the money. We needed, technical, just to really have sessions that we sit and talk about technicalities of sound or of what makes up a great story. And then we finally needed to just trust each other, because, let's face it, even when, we hear of I suppose, where filmmaking was here in the UK, not that long ago, 20 or 30 years ago, and what filmmakers had to come together and do to persuade broadcasters to actually even pay appropriately for certain kinds of programming, then you kind of realize, okay, this is a journey that we're not the first ones about to make it. So anyway, to cut this story short, because it is long, DocuBox started up at the end of last year. We moved really quickly. We thought a lot about it in our research before, and when we set up, we tried to move as fast as we could. What we have now, and I'm really happy to say, is 9 projects here at Sheffield. So if you are one of the people who've been attacked by a huge mob of enthusiastic Kenyan filmmakers, that's us, with our myriad of projects. We're going to show you a little clip now, but just to give you the feeling of, or a sense of the kinds of things that we support. We're looking for voices, for stories that need to be told, that people want to tell, that people are driven to tell, but just haven't found the support to. We so far put $2,500 into teasers, which are supported by really intense masterclasses and so on. These films that people wanted to make. It's not anyone suggesting what needs to be made. And these teasers, out of the 12, 6 at the end of this month will receive $20,000 each, which I think, having had a snoop around the grants available here, we think is not that bad. And those 6 go on to be made with and they're accompanied by a sense of community around them. So I think if we could possibly play our 4-minute clip about DocuBox.
DocuBox, I think it's been such a huge.
Oh no.
Okay, just relax.
The information from the mentors was just out of this world. Very impressed and very touched by the way that we've been looked after.
The kind of filmmaking that DocuBox is mentoring us guys is a beautiful way of telling a story.
Ando makwa mbithukiciei ningumukania chuma kiasa kithikita nzoka kikwicha mwaki. Mando joko biero giwero kwecho.
Boxing ndio naweza sema it was the only avenue. Vijana wa mitaa magangari walikuwa wanaweza facilitatiwa.
So we had traditional lamp with paraffin. That's how we were able to memorize the national anthem at night. We were with my brothers, and I still remember my mother was sitting there. She wants to see who gets to memorize it first. It was very important. I think I am the one who learned it first. Yeah, because I liked music.
For me, freedom is a synonym of skateboarding. Freedom and skateboarding are one thing.
If you could just skate all the time, that's the life you should live. Given us a new family away from our old families.
Jina langu mimi Suleiman, mimi ni singer-songwriter. I revel in my East African traditions and I promote kila pahala. I want to return to the Swahili system to make a journey by any means necessary.
Nikatilili anekuwa ni mke ambaye ukuwa ni kama mume.
Na ni wangapi nyinyi mnataka kuwa kama Mekatilili? Anyoshe mkono. When she died, they didn't even perform the funeral ceremony for her. They had forgotten about her.
The biggest thing niko nayo ni kuwa disowned na family naona mahali pa kweli. Libidi nitafute msichana nizae naye mtoto to cover myself isijulikane mimi ni kuchu.
Hajajua kama mimi ni kuchu na zai open up kumwambia tutonge break. I don't have feelings for her. Seriously in bed sina.
That's exactly what we would like to exist to do. Okay. Yeah, so that was really just a small taste of the projects, and we really just ended cutting them where the 4 minutes ended. But amongst those, I mean, we have a film also about a port that's about to be built in a tiny idyllic island port called Lamu. We have, story of somebody who was captured by the Al-Shabaab and a terrorist group and kept for a long time. So it's very, very diverse. Filmmakers, different levels of experience. The main thing is, are you driven? Is there a story? Are you telling it in your own authentic voice? And do you want to be part of a community that can come together to make ourselves heard and seen? And that's what we're about.
Thank you, Judy. I've been told to encourage you to tweet, but obviously the phone on silence, and the hash, it's #ATFT for you to tweet part of the discussion.
What's the network?
What's the network? Sorry? What's the network, I've been asked.
Is there one?
SCC guest. Okay, all right.
There you go. You're still discriminating against us black people.
With no 3G. With no 3G. Okay, if you do get the network, Andy, please let us know, because not everyone. Brilliant. Okay. Now going to come to final. Flora.
Shit.
What's the derivation of cuck? Where's it come from? Is it your own special word?
Oh no, it's Afrikaans. It's actually a language that's an African language, even though in 1976, with many lives fighting, opposing it. The imposition of Afrikaans. Yeah.
Well, that's cleared that up then.
Speaking on my behalf. It's compromised. I think what's interesting is listening to my colleagues is just how quickly the both broadcasting is changing in our lifetimes, and also how funding is changing. So there are different opportunities, and they're always on the move, and it's very striking, really, to me, how that's happening. And also the platforms for viewing are changing. So that's my preface, because I'm thinking about it a lot, and I think everybody should. Clearly, I'm here on behalf of Al Jazeera, funded out of Qatar, and they actually spend quite a lot of time thinking about Africa, and colleagues here, Ron and Sorias, who have been working in Africa, and it'd be good to have them talk about Africa Investigates, especially. I do have a trailer, and I don't know if I can break the rule and show the trailer first, can I? Because then I can jog my memory, since I'm image-driven. Thank you.
Africa has been seen by the world through the lenses of Western photographers. Images often defined by what they have failed to see. But a new generation of African photographers is reclaiming their continent's image. In a 6-part series, Artscape refocuses on Africa through the eyes of those who know it best. The New African Photography on Al Jazeera.
Searching for beauty in the most unlikely places. Award-winning photographer Bowden Nwanda has set out to challenge cliched perceptions of Africa and bring photography to his community. A story of hope and beauty in the face of adversity. Episode 5 of The New African Photography. Congolese Dreams on Al Jazeera.
Khadija is a Moroccan wedding photographer. It's her hard work that puts food on her family's table. Despite this, they disapprove of her late nights. While her money is accepted, she herself is rejected. Witness Casablanca camerawoman on Al Jazeera.
For centuries, Egypt has sought to command power over the Nile.
We aren't harming any of the Nile Basin countries. They don't need the Nile. They get their water from rainfall.
But upstream, this dominance is being challenged by countries who want a greater share.
I know that some people in Egypt have old-fashioned ideas. These circumstances have changed and changed forever.
Struggle over the Nile on Al Jazeera.
Following the collapse of the Gaddafi regime, Al Jazeera tracks the Tuareg mercenaries forced to flee Libya, faced with poverty, starvation, and isolation. The struggle for an independent homeland gains momentum for the orphans of the Sahara on Al Jazeera.
Vraiment, tandis ça va vivre na ça dans vivre pas comme ça suivi la vie on quoi trace magazine la tandis moi et monsieur le photo ha qui ou ha de place bon attends qu'on faut non ni la vont bangar quoi.
In search of his long-lost brother, a filmmaker discovers the reality of West African plantation workers. Looking for my brother on Al Jazeera.
In the 1980s, newly liberated Zimbabwe was a land of hope. But within a generation, much has changed. After years abroad, an exiled filmmaker returns, only to find her memories of home will have to remain in her mind.
Zimbabwe, something very beautiful that is not looked after. Like an abandoned child.
Witness The Bag on My Back on Al Jazeera.
I referred to Africa Investigates earlier, and I'm going to refer back to it because we really wanted to show a clip of that. So I'm sorry we haven't, but you can see it on the website, is that right? So I do recommend it highly. I just wanted to show those clips to show a sort of wide range of films that Al Jazeera has done in the past covering Africa. They make some in-house, so series like The Nile was made in-house, and Orphans of Sahara was made in-house. But we also, as Witness and People in Power and the Africa Investigates series are done with filmmakers. And you can see a sort of theme there that we like working through the first person, through personal experience, and with a huge range of filmmakers, really. So that's very important to us. So the Casablanca camerawoman is a really good example that, and you know, it's easy in the fact that Africa's so big to forget North Africa, and of course we look at that quite a lot. So sometimes Africa seems to be polarized between North Africa and South Africa, and then there's this big bit in the middle, isn't there? And it seems to just happen like that, and it's an awful shame because there are such good stories coming from the rest of Africa. And we do that. We do polarize Africa. I know that we do. Casablanca Camerawoman was made by a Moroccan director. She was a first-time director. It took her about 3 years to make the film, and it was very difficult for her, but it's a delightful film. And then we also showed a clip from the Artscape series, African Photographers. I think there's something about inverting stereotypes, which I think is very important for us all, and to have Africa told through African photographers looking at Africa in a different way, in the same way that they may as well, you know, travel across the world. It's about a maturity of the industry, isn't it? And that it would be nice for African filmmakers to make films around the world, as, you know, to invert everything. I think it's very important, and we haven't really got that far yet in some ways. The inversion of stereotypes is important in encouraging new filmmakers. The other thing that really strikes me, having worked with Al Jazeera for nearly 9 years, is just how long the whole thing takes. Creating a mature industry anywhere in the world, you know, the BBC started in the 30s or something, and it actually took quite a long time even then to sort of break the hold of the BBC, if you like, and to open that industry up to a wider group of people. And it's the same around the world, but it takes even longer. And of course, there's major censorship issues, which again you can talk about, which affect how stories are told, which I think are really key. And in some ways, the world is getting a smaller place. You know, there's a lot of nationalism, and broadcasters seem to be closing down. You know, we're talking about France, for instance. I was speaking to a commissioning editor in France, and she said, I don't know, there is no place for international documentaries anymore on French television. And it reflects the politics. So, and I also looked at the Miners film, and I thought this corporatization, this power struggle that's going on, which the Miners film just accentuates and underlines, is going on at all levels. This grab for power happens in the media as much as it does over resources. The media is a resource in some ways, isn't it? So I think it's really fascinating. And of course, I work with artists, so I'm very aware of it, I suppose, as one might be aware with the BBC or any other major broadcaster. I think it's the same. So I'll stop now, really. Is that enough, do you think? I have, you know, while I'm performing my role here, bits of paper and brochures, if anybody would like one afterwards. There we go.
I'm glad the alarm stopped. But thanks all for your presentations. I'm going to just talk very briefly to our three panelists and then open it up to the audience, before I open up to the audience. And Rihad, I just wanted to come to you first. And I mean, we know, you know, if you're funded, you're great artists, you can always look into the soul of the other. That's what artists do. But I wanted to ask you, is there anything specific that you think the African voice can bring to stories about Africa that is worth noting, or that it's worth, I suppose, privileging in a way?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, I was coming from the other side to say, you know, I think it's just a bit nonsensical to be saying people shouldn't be making stories about us without us, because those stories will always be made. And sometimes a lot of times that they won't be very good, because these teams just come in and parachute in, and you can often sense the distance, you can sense the lack of intimacy, you can sense the lack of trust, because they're not rooted, they haven't developed the relationships with the characters, they don't understand deeply enough, they haven't drilled down on what they're doing. And you know, from good filmmakers inside any specific territory, that comes because firstly it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper, you know, you can develop your relationships over months, sometimes years. You are an insider, and you do have insights which cannot be gleaned, and you all under codes and stuff. But often, and this goes back to what Judy's saying, you know, these platforms in our own country, documentaries, film, you know, real documentary films, considered a threat. And there's less and less money for it. The recession's bitten hard, and there's just not slots. Even in South Africa, where we have an industry, you know, the public broadcaster was trying to transform itself from a state broadcaster into a public broadcaster. It never really quite got there, and is reverting very quickly back to being a fully blown state broadcaster. So those are some of the issues that I suppose the only... Yeah, and we have to build our own capacity. The challenge seems so big now that, what can we do outside of trying to all get together and running our own channels? I think that's because, the fundamental question is, why do we make documentaries? I mean, primarily we do it for our own audience. Our first audience must be our own people. And if we've got, if we're now in a situation where the majority of our money is coming from outside, and we've got the international commissioning editors and funds pressing on us to make our stories comprehensible to an outside audience, often, and that often means some serious compromises and diluting what we want to say and how we want to say it, because unlike fiction, our work is much more coded in the locale. You don't get our jokes, you don't get our music, you don't understand our language. We can't be subtitling everything, you know what I mean? So these are some of the serious constraints we're facing.
And Judy, you talked about, some of those challenges and having to, do the CCTV work to get through it. And I mean, what about what you're attempting, not quite the channel that Rihad's talking about, but a way of bringing together a group of people to build capacity, but you're still finding that challenge around raising the funds and making the connections with the audience. Have you considered what the Nigerians did, for instance, with the sort of Nollywood model, where they established a relationship with the audience that was self-sustaining through actually pitching the productions? And in the first 10, 15 years, there were huge issues around production values because of that. But they pitched the productions at a point that could sustain what they were doing. Have you considered those kinds of interventions at all?
I mean, make no mistake, Nollywood is a huge success. And whatever we think of it, whether or not we like the one camera and can't hear the sound and everything is dark and you can just see eyes shining, it doesn't matter. It's loved, it's watched, Whether it's my mother or my friend who's secretly watching it and not telling me, people buy this stuff and they buy a lot of it. But again, I think it's important to try and think of where Nollywood came from. And I found it really interesting to talk to someone who was doing a PhD on the beginning of Nollywood. And really it began with many VHSs. VHS is just about to go out of usage or out of fashion, and businessmen saying, how are we going to push these empty VHSs? Let's put anything on them. So that's an industry very, very much driven by businessmen, and there's an answer that they arrived at that has worked, and there's a huge amount of content that they have churned out, and now better stuff is rising to the top, but it's still fiction. And to be a documentary filmmaker, and in Kenya there is similar. We have Riverwood, we have some very interesting things happening.
I guess the question is, can you transfer the model to a non-fiction, to documentary, and what might that look like?
We've had many internal debates about this. I think I strongly believe that documentary film and stories of who we are have a place that you can't attach a value on, and I don't think that we're going to find a place to have the huge returns needed to support this. I think this is culture, and I think culture is like building a road or supporting a school. You have to find the money for it. But I also think that at some place, and DocuBox perhaps is involved in this, we need to find out how to make large amounts of, whether we like it or not, factual content that we can sell across the continent to different broadcasters, or have enough content to think about starting our own stations with. We can't avoid that conversation. Otherwise, we're constantly caught in a spiral of always trying to find money to make these creative documentaries, or documentaries that take huge spans of time. So I think we have to have both. And we are actually looking at ways of doing that.
If the business people won't do it, I mean, what conversations and what kind of discourse have you had with the state broadcaster? Rihad again talked about SABC, that for a long time was trying to move to this public broadcasting model, but we see it, as he said, retreating into a state broadcasting model. What conversation, what discourse have you had with the Kenyan state broadcasting house about them supporting documentary filmmaking?
I mean, I think what's interesting about Kenya is the KBC, Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, really began as a proper state or national television station, where we did actually have, when I was growing up, a lot of, they weren't the greatest, made documentary films, but there was a lot of documentary shown and flighted. If you go and look in our old archives at the huge sort of 35 and 60 millimeter reels that sit there, you'll actually realize that we were commissioning a lot of stuff in the 70s. That space really became a space taken over by a dictatorship, and the whole channel was really put to becoming a government mouthpiece. Now, when you take a step back and you try and recreate a thing that was mashed, everyone's a bit confused about what it's supposed to be. And right now, the government feels very strongly that they are supposed to compete with other stations, sell advertising, and there's something that's missing in the conversation, a realization that there is a role for a national broadcaster. This conversation has been had again and again. It's a difficult one to crack. I mean, there have been huge amounts of research done, big pressures put on government to make KBC revert to what it was initially created to become. I think one of the recent, with my colleague, conversations that we had with the government arm, it really came to them asking us, what is wrong with you filmmakers? How come you just want to be supported with grants? They think we're lazy, actually. They're just like, how come you don't want loans? There's something that is really missing in understanding the importance of culture and just recording our archive and our own stories.
Okay, well, thanks. Flora, you talked, when you were talking about The Witness, about the amount of time you spent with one filmmaker in Morocco to build her capacity. I think she was the first-time filmmaker. I mean, how important has been that in terms of, if we go with the title of the session, Nothing About Us Without Us, how important has that been for Al Jazeera in terms of telling stories from that area, that you build local capacity and you get those voices to actually give their own perspectives of their issues?
What a nice question, thank you. Well, of course, it's incredibly important, and it was the original remit of Al Jazeera to have local stories told. And for me, it's still incredibly important that people tell their own stories. It's quite tricky sometimes, and so Casablanca Camera Woman was a really good example. And also, she's a co-production, she's a producer who made her film through co-production, which is difficult. I've noticed, just because I'm working with an international broadcaster, I travel around a bit and look at how much local broadcasters support their own filmmakers. And in huge swathes of the world, they don't. And so, without that, it's quite hard for filmmakers. They have to go out of the country, their own country, to find international support. And international support only comes from particular directions. So it's a bit weird, isn't it, really? you know, Italy, it's quite hard for Italian filmmakers, you know, Italian television. It's, right across the Eastern Europe, there is no support. Russia's a little bit tricky just now. You know, if you just look at the world, there are just swathes of the world where there is no support from local governments for filmmakers. And I think that's really fascinating. What does that mean for the filmmaker, and how documentaries, whether in Africa or anywhere else, how are they going to get made if they're important? And I think they are important because they tell stories in a different way, and they tell stories that don't get told otherwise. So I don't know how you solve the problem, and it's a big problem. It's huge problem.
You're at Channel 4, and we know what's happened to Channel 4 now. You know, they don't show documentaries that have got subtitles. So, but you've also got a problem, haven't you? If you're, I mean, it's less for you because you're international, but national broadcasters, they want to know, why is their audience going to be interested? How are their audience implicated? Why should they care? They're not, you know, your audience is not necessarily some altruistic group. I mean, it's firstly only a small section of any TV audience watch documentary, and then the first concern of national broadcasters is, why would our audience want to watch this film? What's it got to do about them? And this is the problem with co-production, really, isn't it? In many ways, there's some films that lend themselves to co-producing and have international dimensions, and there's others that simply don't. And then here we are, you know, 9 out of 10 documentary filmmakers around the world don't have any broadcast platforms, so we've got to come to Europe. And this obviously affects the gaze and the shape of the documentaries that are getting produced. I mean, I looked at IDFA a couple of years ago. 4 documentaries from Africa. And I don't think any of them were made by African documentary filmmakers.
I mean, I think...
Sorry, Judy.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, it just gets you going. Because, you know, the last year, the Nation Media Group, NMG, which is, you know, television, it's print and it's radio, and it goes across the East African region. These guys made 4 billion shillings in profit. So these are not poor little broadcaster that we're talking about. Okay, you know, given that a lot of this profit actually is driven by the print, the sort of print empire that they have that goes through East Africa, but still, it's 4 billion shillings. So surely, come on, just $1 million a year would actually transform our documentary space. It doesn't sound much, but for us it would do a lot. And when you look further into that, and you talk to people at some of the cable stations, DSTV, Mnet, for instance, it's interesting because you actually find that the people who subscribe to cable, which is happening in a huge way across Africa, do this for the sports and for the reality. You know, so here is this gap that really, there's something that's not being seen, you know, and I think we kind of exist as well to open their eyes a little bit, because the money's there, the audience, I think, is there. There's a kind of addiction to real issues in our regions. People aren't really madly into a lot of the fiction that happens. There's a very big gap, and I hope we can open a space.
I mean, one final question, and then I will come to the audience very quickly, but it's just about kind of audience-generated material. And we talked about the different platforms, and you know, they're not going to be as elaborate or have the time to go into what a properly produced documentary and the money that a properly produced documentary needs. But what you do get is a kind of authentic voice, and I've been very struck that some of the most interesting stuff that has come out of Ukraine recently is stuff that's been shot on mobile phones and put up that the BBC and others, for whatever reason, are not covering, and you get immediate kind of authentic voices from the ground. How much is that impacting on the kinds of work that you're doing at the moment?
I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
Be straight with you.
Okay.
That's not really happening in South Africa. I mean, if you're talking about citizen journalism,
Yeah.
we're trying to get it off the ground, but we're in countries where democracy is often quite fragile. It's not well established. It's still young, and these things are very threatening. They want to still attempting to control what goes out to our population, and that's just simply the context we live with.
Okay, let's go to the audience. 1, 2.
I want to thank the panel. My name is Soria Samura. First of all, I just want to say that if you walk into a room full of non-Africans, especially youngsters, and you ask them, you just say the word, try this, anytime you have the opportunity, try this. Just go into a room full of non-Africans and say the word Africa and ask them to give you one word that they will associate with the word Africa. I bet you will hear words like hunger, corruption, diseases, famine. All these are the negatives. You will not hear the positive stuff. And this is because human beings are human beings. Over the years, for years, if not for centuries, they have been fed with the same about a continent that is full of negative stuff. So you tend to at least, believe that, and you pass it on to your children and future generations. But before I elaborate on that, I just want to quickly ask Rihad, when you go to make your films, when you're making films in Africa, if it's just outside South Africa, do you use fixers?
Yeah, also, I always believe in working with as much local production teams as I can. And often, I go more, I try and find a documentary company to work with, because often you can go badly wrong. It can become a very dangerous space.
Thank you very much. That's exactly the problem that we're facing here. Over the years, these people, the BBC's motto was, nations shall speak unto nations. Excuse me? When has Africans spoken to the rest of the world? We've always been talked to and talked down to. And so what has happened here is that a lot of Africans have thought that, our story is not just black and white. We want to tell our own story. There are other shades. And what happened with our relationship with Al Jazeera, and maybe when I started as well with Insight, or even with the BBC or CNN, we used one word. And I think that should offer an answer to how do we solve this problem? Partnership. A respectable, decent partnership. It is time that people understand that Africans have the capacity to tell their own story. I'll give you one quick example. When Hollywood made Amistad, the language, we Sierra Leoneans, didn't understand where that language came from, some of the stuff they were saying, and they said it's Mendy. So when Warner Brothers came to us and said, because of Cry Freetown, we want you to be involved in Blood Diamond, the first thing I said to Edswick and Ron and I said is that you got to listen to us because we want to make sure the story of Sierra Leone is actually represented through this film. And Edswick gave us that respect. That's why I got involved in Blood Diamond. But the point I'm trying to make here is that two things came to mind, two words when you were talking, is interpretation, and I think the other word was translation. A lot of the time, Western or outside filmmakers who come to Africa, they simply interpret. When it comes to even translation, it's not exact. An African clears his truth when he's talking. It has a meaning. And we're not saying to you, interpret that meaning. We're saying, tell it as it is. So this is why I think it's important for us to create a decent partnership, which we have done with Al Jazeera by going to Africa, find African journalists, bring them to Ghana, train them, and get them to tell their own story from their own perspective. If I'm walking across nearby a stream and I see the water dirty and I want to understand why it's dirty, I don't just look on top. I want to go underneath. And that's what Africans are saying here. It's about time. It's not about positive stories. It's about making sure we tell balanced stories. One word is missing in the storytelling of Africa by outsiders: context. And that's all we're asking for.
Okay, it'd be good to focus on what these collaborative partnerships can look like rather than keep attacking the other side for not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So more constructive, as I think as Soros was saying, examples would help. The gentleman over there.
Hi, Dan Davies. I used to work at Al Jazeera with Flora, and I produced the new African photography for Al Jazeera. But on a slightly different note of capacity building, I think it's worth, because you were saying how can we build capacity, I think it's worth looking at how come Britain has such a deep and wide documentary and TV making industry, and that's basically, whatever we think about it now, the result of Channel 4. And amid all the devastation of Thatcher's reforms, this one thing worked. They introduced Channel 4 in 82, and before then, everything had been made. There were hardly any indies in Britain. Almost everything had been made either by ITV or the BBC. Suddenly, people were leaving the BBC in droves to set up these tiny little boutique indies. And now, 30 years later, we have super indies. And that's the market maturing. But that, in terms
degenerating,
of what... Sorry?
The market degenerating, he said.
Well, but that depends what you think about markets, etc. But it's certainly a powerful industry, and it's certainly a lot of depth. London is the second biggest maker of TV content in the world. And so it's just worth thinking about in terms of what to lobby for in Africa, which is for PSBs, where they exist, to contract out, because I don't think it's money. I don't think it's one big lump of investment. It's investment over time that builds capacity, and that can be quite small. Channel 4 didn't have enormous budgets, but now we have indies that are arguably bigger than Channel 4, and all that's come just from it over time.
Does anybody in the panel want to respond to either of those? Or
just very briefly, I think the problem that we often have is we have this liberal dross where we just present our characters and our stories, the victims, and we're not looking at agency. And that's where we need to go. And that's where the positive stories are. When we're following, we're flipping the story and we're looking at how people are trying to overcome the very real obstacles they're faced with and the conflicts and so on. So that's the sort of stories I like.
Flora, did you want to come?
Yeah, I think it is this thing about constancy, really. Prolonged love. Is that to have a filmmaking community and filmmakers who can return and make another film, the funds have to be there over a long period of time, and the support, not just funds, as Dan said, but support in any way, and how you create that. So you can sort of drip money for 3 years or something, but then it's gone. And, you kind of need a long tradition. It's quite interesting in somewhere like Poland. I'm sorry to keep thinking of other places, but, they had a great culture of filmmaking, and it was noticeable how the broadcasters stopped supporting and Italy, stopped supporting their filmmakers. But then when they go back again, it's easier to work with them collaboratively. I think collaboration is so important. But it takes lots of different parties, the funders, the filmmakers to show, to be persistent. But there is no one size fits all, is there? There's no one solution. But the constancy, over a long period of time, it's not quick.
When you were looking for filmmakers on the ground, did you would a group like DocuBox been helpful in
Yes, always. I mean, I believe in collaboration all the time. A broadcaster can't or won't do it by themselves. So to collaborate with a group of people like DocuBox is very important. for us. We've got an initiative called Viewfinder, which it doesn't happen in Africa at the moment, though we're thinking about it as a sort of complement to Africa Investigates. But we do it in Latin America, and we have stakeholders who are a key part of us establishing this program to bring new filmmakers into the network. And we also do one in Asia. But it's a lot of work, because building up friends and being constant is very important. And broadcasters aren't always like that. So, trying to follow through and always be there and follow up the next year and do it again the next year is and Africa Investigates was a very important series, and more important is that it happens again, and then it happens again, and DocuBox keeps going for 20 years, you can only establish sort of groups of filmmakers over a long period of time with a lot of support. So it's not just money, it's editorial support and
maybe we should be thinking about regulating broadcasters to force them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something's
I think that's the point you were making, isn't it? About that. We'll go here and then pick up two more at the back. So we'll just take the the three questions in succession, or statements if they are indeed statements. Go on.
My name is Tseho Moleta. I'm from South Africa. I work with the Association for Transformation in Film and TV, and we take groups of emerging Black producers around the world to different markets. And one of the things that I've noticed is the stories that we tell. So several people have pointed on this, but I just want to speak to it pointedly. The types of stories that get told about Africans, or that African people can bring to a market, and how we framed and all of them. I'm tired. I'm just so tired. I mean, I'm a younger filmmaker, and the things that we see are important, but I'm just so tired of the fact that those are the only stories. We have 3 South African films on at the festival, and it's about the drama and the chaos, and you know what I mean. But I was glad to see some of DocuBox's projects. There's stories about skateboarders. There are other people that live in Africa, and okay, we're living in these conditions, but they're people, and like people everywhere, they have their own ambitions, desires, and the little things that they do every day that can be told. When we go to other film festivals and the other parts of the world that are showcased, we see the nuances of how human existence plays out there, whereas in Africa it's the big political dramas that play out, and miners are getting shot, and it's just important, but where are the other stories? And also, just from my experience, coming to a festival with 2 projects, if I'm pitching, and I have one about, it's a story of hope and ordinary people, blah, 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 and then the other one is, African culture and tradition and the clash between, modernity and the people that caught in between, and that one is the one that everyone is like, oh, wow, what a lovely story, let's talk more about that. I'm just like, is there more? Is there space?
Have you found the point that Rahid was making, that people want the national broadcasters now want a point of entry that is relevant to their audience?
Yeah. I mean, I can see. I mean, it's problematic how they play it out, but I can see how, that's relevant to them. But, is there any other space for different ways of looking at it? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we should start at home.
Yeah.
See what's on our screens at home. It's nothing international.
The 2 at the back, and then.
Okay. Hello? Yeah. No, I just wanted to say something about, I think it's part of our responsibility to oblige our own broadcasters to take initiatives. I mean, you have, in South Africa, you have DSTV. There are real bodies that have real money and real space, but they never invest in African films. DSTV never puts money in it. And you have places like Cote West who buy but never produce. There's a lot of money out there. But we have not found a way to make the space both a cultural and a sustainable industry. And I think that at least the South African way of doing is they're trying to build an industry. But building an industry has to come in competition with other things. So which is the space that they're going to spend on it and spend on it for the whole time? Because as she was saying, as Judy was saying, it's like building roads. You're going to have to continue building roads, okay?
You didn't introduce yourself.
Sorry, my name is Jehan Al-Tahri.
Okay.
I'm an Egyptian, South African, French, and other filmmaker. But what I wanted to say is that there are other models too. In Morocco, for example, when the state suddenly decided, yes, this is important, what they did is that they put a tax on absolutely every single ad, a tiny tax that would go into a film fund. And suddenly you had a pot of money that allowed the whole system to start working. And so now Morocco not only has its own cinema infrastructure, TV channels like 2M and things like that, and now co-producing. They become players on the market. And so I really do think that we have a role to play too. We can't just...
Can I ask you very quickly?
Yes.
I mean, we're here in Sheffield, and we're talking about collaborations and partnerships. What is it that, in terms of helping that sector or those ideas get off the ground in Africa, what is it that people here can do? Where do you think that the support can be given, if any?
You mean Sheffield
No, I'm talking about the filmmaking community.
The filmmaking community, I think they just need to be slightly more interested in the other.
Okay.
I mean, I think that we spend half our times trying to say, okay, how am I going to tell the story in a way that they don't realize that it's actually about Africa before they switch off? And so I'm mentoring the South African delegation. So when we were planning our pitches, like one would say, okay, Nuktula started, they say, no, call her Judy. Because you need to get to sentence 3 before the guy switches off. And so we are in a completely warped system where friendships and knowing people gets you to be heard, and anything that is slightly different is out of the general. So what is there to be done? Just open your minds. It's not just, yeah, that's all I got. Yeah,
well,
open your minds.
Thank you. The woman next to, the lady next to you, I think she had her hand up. Yeah. No, okay.
Which person?
Okay, get to she's fine now.
You know what? I think that the whole issue of people talking about collaborations, it's about partnerships, but you have to have something that you are bringing to the table. And until a time African governments understand that the issue of film is just as important as the issue of investing in sending someone to some kind of market as an exporter, until that time comes when our governments understand the importance of actually pushing that as a culture or as a commodity, then I think that we are really, really in a wrong space. And talking about the issue of collaborations, when companies always say that they want to come to Africa and work with Africans, as a person who works in South Africa, the issue of race, we mustn't forget the fact that white people think black people are not good enough. When they come to make films in South Africa, they always work with white companies, but they are telling black people's stories. Black people's stories that actually the issue of language becomes a problem for a white South African. It is almost always the case. There is Rihad, a seasoned documentary filmmaker. I'm a 2-time BAFTA winner myself, but it hardly happens that an outside company will actually look out for Rihad or myself to work with them, because the issue of race is very pertinent. White money and white people don't think black people are good enough. So those are some of the issues in terms of us as Africans and as black people. If we want to change certain dynamics, it's about letting people know that, you know what, even if you are coming with money, I also have something that I'm offering to the table. Do you know, what it is that I'm giving you is worth also the amount of money. And then so you find that successful films or documentaries that have been made within the context of collaboration, it is companies that are coming from out that are seeing you as an equal. So you participate in the whole process, not just as a fixer. You participate even in the edit, even in terms of how you think the narration of the story should go. And so, but I think we need to lobby governments, people we elect in power, we need to lobby DSTV. They've got so much money, but they will tell you that they don't make documentaries because documentaries don't bring them advertising. Documentaries don't give them money. So I think that we need to find ways of really putting pressure on at home, and then we become stronger, and then we've got more bargaining power.
Thank you. I'm on an amber light at the moment, so it will go red in a minute, and we have to then finish this session. So I'm going to, there have been 2 people with their hands up for a long time. I'll take these 2 last questions and then come back to the audience. Okay. There are lots of people who've had their hands up, and but we've done a lot on the back, and I'm trying to balance the audience as well. You're very good. You're very good. You should come and share.
Hello. Yes, thank you. I think she most likely has said it better than I could have put it. But
okay, we'll go to this gentleman.
But I have thank you. Seriously, but let me just put in 1 or 2 words into it. What Tejo talked about, especially on the issue of whether we actually are having a balanced kind of view of Africa, or an honest view of Africa, or is it a skewed view of Africa? What I would say is, without Africans being able to be totally involved in what you're doing, seriously, it will end up still remaining quite skewed. And I'll take a good example of what Rehad actually did with Minor Shutdown. If it was an outsider, and I'm not calling the others totally outsiders, but if it wasn't being done by a South African, the view of Minor Shutdown would have been totally skewed. You would not have had those balanced voices of an alternative person talking so strongly against what happened to the miners and how they were shot down unfavorably. And most of the times you find, if I come to a space and I'm thinking this is a marketplace where I want to come and sell my wares, and I start feeling that I have a vibe which makes me feel I'll be disadvantaged in one way or another, or I'm entering the space but I will not get a fair view, or if I give my voice and I try to project my voice, I won't be heard. And I know for sure that I have something that's really cute, I get a bit worried. So what am I talking about? I'm saying, when you come through from DocuBox with our wares, and we are coming into this space, we believe quietly in our own way that we have something interesting, we have an alternative voice, we are bringing into this market something that you've not most likely had for a long, long time, and you want to share in that. And if these boundaries have to be broken, where you've got to start thinking about what is this alternative from East Africa, then get it from DocuBox, get it from South Africans themselves, work with them collaboratively, work with them as partners, but don't talk over them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go to you, and then I will go to you to finish off from the audience. Yes, please. But please try and keep it as short as you can, because we're up against the time.
I will keep it very short. My name's Ron McCullough from Insight News, Insight TWI, The World Investigates, working with Sorius and with all the teams of colleagues in Africa. I just wanted to emphasize that the audience don't owe us any favors.
Mm.
You know, we have to work. It doesn't matter white, black, pink, or purple. If we're not out there making stories that are gripping, engaging, and doing the business of the craft that we're in, then we are owed nothing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. No, just behind you, yes.
Just to say, I'm guessing that the conversation here is not about outsider not being able to kind of add their perspective. It's about having enough insiders having a perspective. But also, I'm just thinking, is it a matter of, to use the quote from The Wire, following the money? And in a sense, I'm thinking if there's an elephant in the room, Bertha Foundation has sponsored this festival, and and Bertha Foundation is run, and it's a South African foundation, South African founder. So I wanted to know from the South Africans, is that the answer really? I mean, because in terms of, kind of, instead of the government, it's a kind of wealthy entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, helping to construct a kind of new narrative.
You're the South African on the panel, and then can you answer the question and then also sum up, and we'll take the two other summaries, and then we'll conclude the session.
I mean, judging broadcasters, super indies, I think the way we need to judge broadcasters and the broadcast landscape is how many independent producers they're actually working with. What's the WDR at one stage is working with 400 independent producers. For me, that's the best sort of public broadcaster there is around. So super indies, fuck them. Impact dockies, yeah, there's very little space left for those quiet films, those really beautiful, touching films. The money is just shrinking. With the Great Recession's now been going on for 6 years, and the money available to broadcasters is just decreasing and decreasing. And the funds that are there now, they want to look at the big social stories, and also broadcasters as well. That genuinely they want to get involved in stories where they think they are able to make some sort of difference to what's going on in the specific territory and in the wider world. Government understanding support for documentary is important. Yeah, well, I've got one word for that, and that is forward to the revolution. And maybe, we are not living in mature democracies, and they are considered, film generally is considered a threat, and we've got to understand that reality. Our governments aren't going to do anything for us. So, and that brings me back to Bertha. Great, the more Berthas we can get, where we've got radical philanthropists who are willing to sell the family business and keep a bit for themselves, a substantial bit, but give the rest out for good work, great. But is it the answer? Absolutely no. We cannot have foundations determining what sort of films are made in the world. That would be the beginning of the end, because all foundations have their own agendas. It's only through government money, money which doesn't have any clear agendas, that I think is there any hope for salvation.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, Judy, quickly, and then Flora.
I think a lot of what's happened for us as a delegation or as a bunch of people from the East African region is this whole week, this whole session has really helped helped us keep trying to put together a very big puzzle that we don't have the answers to. For me, I just know we have a lot of work to do. I take a lot from what Flora was saying about longevity, how, find what we've started is great. How do we survive into 2014, 2020, and so on? Otherwise, we don't have a foundation to build the things that we need to have built. So we hope to live long, and we hope to get cracking on all the stuff that we need to do at home before we can make the kind of impact that we need to in the world.
Thank you.
No easy answer, is there? I was just thinking, you know, here in the UK, there was a big fight for independent broadcasters, independent filmmakers, you know, the 25% campaign, all these things, and they were turning points. Ron will remember them. Look, he's nodding his head. So Ron and I are probably the oldest people in the room. But they were very important fights. And so the Channel 4 and the 25% campaign with the BBC to sort of liberate the, you know, who was telling the stories. And these are individually very important things. We didn't talk about Kickstarter, all these things, sort of people who watch the films who as individuals want to support it. So at the moment it's a sort of a patchwork, isn't it? The broadcasters are still involved. Governments will or will not be involved because sometimes they're not going to support filmmakers. That's the point. They don't want to support filmmakers. It's not in their interests. So it's a global patchwork of filmmakers having to find money wherever they can, and that's how it's going to be, I guess. There's no one answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, a big round of applause for...